The Duke's wife stood in the doorway of her own bedroom and watched her husband kiss another woman on the mouth. Not a stolen moment, not a fleeting mistake. A slow, deliberate claiming. His hand in her hair, her laughter soft against his throat. They didn't even notice Elena. 3 years of marriage, and she had become so invisible that betrayal didn't require closed doors anymore. She pressed one hand into her stomach, still flat, still secret, and felt the truth settle like iron in her chest. She was carrying the heir to the Ashcroft name, and the man who should have been hers would never know it. Because tonight, Elena Viermont was going to vanish. If you want to see how far a woman can run when she has nothing left to lose, and what happens when the man who destroyed her finally realizes what he's lost, stay with me until the end. Drop a like, leave a comment with the city you're watching from, and let's see how far this story can travel. Elena had learned to walk quietly. Not out of grace, though the servants always mistook it for that, but out of necessity. In Stormhaven Manor, noise drew attention. Attention drew Rowan, and Rowan's attention was a coin toss between cold indifference and cutting cruelty. So she moved through the halls like a ghost in silk slippers, her steps soundless on marble floors that had seen 200 years of Ashcroft blood. The East Wing was hers in name only. A gilded cage with tall windows that overlooked gardens, she wasn't welcome to walk through alone. It was early October when everything changed. The morning had been ordinary enough. Breakfast in her chambers, toast, tea, fruit she didn't touch. A maid named Petra, who pitied her too much to meet her eyes. A stack of unopened correspondence forwarded from her family estate, each one a reminder that the Viramonts had sold her and spent the money within a year. She'd stood at the window for an hour, watching fog roll in from the coast, thick and gray and suffocating. Fitting. Then the nausea hit. It came in waves, sharp, insistent, impossible to ignore. She'd barely made it to the basin before her stomach turned itself inside out. Petra appeared at her shoulder like a shadow, steadying her with surprising strength for such a small woman. "My lady, shall I send for the physician?" "No." Elena's voice came out hoarse. "It's nothing. Something I ate." But Petra's eyes went soft with knowing, and Elena felt the truth crack open between them like an egg. She wasn't sick. She was pregnant. Bacanas. Dr. Hollis came anyway. Petra must have sent word despite her protest, because the old man arrived that afternoon with his black leather case and his 2 gentle hands. He confirmed it with barely an examination. 8 weeks, I'd estimate, perhaps 9. Elena sat very still on the edge of her bed, hands folded in her lap. "Does the Duke need to be informed immediately?" "That's your choice, Your Grace, though I imagine he'll be pleased. An heir is no small matter for a family like the Ashcrofts." She almost laughed. Pleased, as if Rowan had ever been pleased by anything she did. "Thank you, Doctor. I'll tell him myself. In my own time." Hollis hesitated. "Your Grace, if I may—" "You may not." He left with a bow that felt like pity. Elena didn't tell Rowan that night, or the next, or the one after that. She told herself it was strategy, that she needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to use this one piece of leverage she'd been handed. But the truth was simpler and uglier. She didn't want to give him anything. Not her body, which he'd already claimed on their wedding night with all the warmth of a business transaction. Not her obedience, which he expected the way other men expected sunrise. And certainly not the satisfaction of knowing he'd finally gotten what his bloodline demanded. So she kept the secret curled tight inside her like a fist, and she watched. Rowan Ashcroft was not a kind man. He was handsome in the way sharp things are handsome. All edges and angles, dark hair that fell just slightly too long, gray eyes that could freeze or burn depending on his mood. He wore power like other men wore cloaks, and he'd inherited enough of it that he'd never had to question whether he deserved it. The Ashcroft fortune came from shipping and steel, old money that had survived wars and revolutions by knowing when to bend and when to break others. Rowan's father had been a tyrant, his grandfather, worse. The family tree was full of men who took what they wanted and called it legacy. Rowan fit right in. Elena had known this, of course, before she married him. Her father had been desperate, debts piled high, creditors circling, and the Ashcrofts had offered a deal. Marriage in exchange for financial salvation. A daughter for a dukedom. She'd been 19. Rowan had been 28, newly titled after his father's sudden death and utterly uninterested in a bride beyond what she represented. Legitimacy, alliance, heirs, Their wedding had been grand. 300 guests, orchids imported from the south, champagne that cost more than most families earned in a year. Their wedding night had been efficient, and every night since had been absence. He kept mistresses, of course. Everyone knew. The servants whispered about it in the kitchens. The ladies at court smiled behind their fans when Elena entered a room. Even her own mother had written once to say, "All men stray, darling. A wife's duty is to pretend not to notice." But Rowan didn't even bother with pretense. He brought them to the manor, installed them in guest suites, dined with them in halls where Elena was expected to sit silent and dignified, performing the role of duchess, while he performed the role of satisfied husband. She'd learned not to flinch, but she'd never learned not to feel. The woman's name was Isabel. Tall, auburn-haired, with the kind of laugh that sounded like music and made men lean in closer without realizing they were doing it. She'd been at the manor for a week, ostensibly as a guest of Rowan's cousin, but everyone knew the truth. Elena had seen the way Rowan looked at her during dinner, like she was something he'd already won. And Isabel looked back with the confidence of a woman who knew her value and had no intention of apologizing for it. On the 8th night, Elena made the mistake of retiring early. She'd felt the nausea creeping in again during dessert, a slow roll of discomfort that made the candlelight feel too bright and the conversation too loud. She'd excused herself with a murmur that no one acknowledged and walked the long corridor back to her chambers. She almost made it to bed before she heard the voices. They were in the sitting room attached to her bedroom. Her sitting room. The one she used for correspondence and morning tea and the small, quiet moments when she pretended her life wasn't a performance. The door was ajar. Rowan's voice came first, low and amused. "You're terrible at being discreet. And you're terrible at pretending you care." Isabel's laugh, bright and shameless. "Why bother? She never says anything." Elena's hand froze on the doorframe. "She knows her place." Rowan's tone was casual, dismissive, the way someone might discuss wallpaper or weather. "It's one of her few virtues. Poor thing. Does she ever fight back?" "Why would she? She has everything a woman could want: title, wealth, security. Everything but you." A pause. Then Rowan's voice, quieter but no less cruel. "She never asked for me, just the name." Elena felt something inside her chest crack clean in half. She should have left, turned around, gone back down the hall, locked herself in one of the guest rooms, and pretended she'd never heard any of it. But her feet carried her forward instead. She pushed the door open. Rowan and Isabel were on the settee by the fire, his hand in her hair, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. They looked like a painting. Something beautiful and unreachable. They looked like lovers. It took them 3 full seconds to notice her. Isabel pulled back first, eyes widening in something that might have been surprise or might have been amusement. Rowan turned his head slowly, and when his gaze landed on Elena, there was no shame in it, no guilt, just annoyance. "Elena." He said her name like an interruption. "I thought you'd gone to bed." She stood there in her evening gown, pale blue silk that had cost more than her family's last carriage, and felt the full weight of her invisibility settle over her like a shroud. "This is my room," she said quietly. "It's a sitting room." Rowan stood, adjusting his cuffs with the same care he might take after a business meeting. "Hardly private." Isabel rose too, smoothing her skirts, her expression somewhere between apologetic and entertained. "I should go." "No need." Rowan's voice was firm. "My wife was just leaving." Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and saw nothing. No recognition, no remorse, just the cold transactional certainty of a man who believed he owned everything in his sight, including her. She felt the baby shift inside her, a flutter, faint and impossible but real. And she made her decision. She didn't say another word, just turned and walked out, closing the door behind her with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slam. She walked past her bedroom, past the main staircase, past the portrait gallery filled with generations of Ashcroft men who'd all looked at their wives the same way Rowan looked at her. She walked until she reached the library, a room she loved because Rowan never entered it, and locked the door behind her. Then she sat down at the writing desk, pulled out a piece of parchment, and began to plan her disappearance. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of smiling at breakfast. 3 weeks of nodding through dinner conversations she wasn't part of. 3 weeks of playing the role so perfectly that no one suspected the Duchess was already gone. She sold her jewelry first, piece by piece, through a dealer in the city who asked no questions and paid in cash. The emerald necklace Rowan's mother had given her at the wedding, the sapphire bracelet from her own mother, the last gift before the family went bankrupt, the diamond earrings she'd worn exactly once. Each sale bought her a little more freedom. She packed carefully. One trunk, small enough to carry, filled with plain dresses and sturdy boots, and none of the silk that marked her as nobility. She left behind everything with the Ashcroft crest, everything monogrammed, everything that could be traced. She wrote no letters, made no goodbyes. On the night of October 29th, while the manor slept and the staff prepared for the Duke's annual winter hunt, Elena Viramont walked out the servants' entrance and into the fog. She took nothing but her trunk, her money, and the child growing inside her, and she didn't look back. The first night, she slept in a coaching inn 20 miles north. The room was small and cold, with a narrow bed and a window that didn't quite close. She paid the innkeeper with coins that felt strange in her hand. She'd never handled currency before, never needed to, and climbed the stairs in borrowed boots that pinched her feet. She lay awake for hours, listening to the sounds of the road outside. Horses, voices, the rumble of carts heading toward the city she'd just left behind. She waited for regret. It didn't come. What came instead was relief, vast and terrifying and so overwhelming she had to press her fist to her mouth to keep from sobbing. She was free. For the first time in 3 years, maybe for the first time in her entire life, no one was watching her. No one was measuring her worth. No one was deciding what she was allowed to want. She curled onto her side, one hand resting on her stomach, and whispered into the dark, "We're going to be all right." She didn't believe it yet, but she thought maybe, someday, she could. The second day, she bought passage on a mail coach heading north toward the coast. The driver was a gruff man named Terence, who chewed tobacco and didn't ask questions. The other passengers were farmers, tradesmen, a woman with 2 young children who stared at Elena like she was a puzzle they couldn't solve. She told them her name was Mara Hale, a widow, traveling to stay with distant family. It was the first lie she'd ever told that felt like the truth. The journey took 5 days. 5 days of rattling roads and shared meals and nights in coaching inns that smelled like smoke and damp wool. 5 days of learning how to speak to people who didn't bow when she entered a room. The nausea came and went. She learned to carry bread in her pockets, to sip water slowly, to excuse herself when the swaying of the coach became too much. On the third day, the woman with the children, her name was Anne, offered her a boiled egg and a knowing smile. "How far along?" Elena, Mara, hesitated. 3 months. Maybe a little more." "First?" "Yes." Anne nodded. "It gets easier and harder, but you'll manage." Mara didn't ask how she knew, just accepted the egg and the kindness and tucked both away like treasures. They reached the village of Greymore on a wet, gray afternoon that felt like the edge of the world. The coast stretched out beyond the cliffs, wild, dark, endless. The village itself was small, maybe 200 people, clustered around a harbor that serviced fishing boats and the occasional trade ship. The buildings were stone and wood, weathered by salt and wind, and the streets were more mud than cobblestone. It was nothing like Stormhaven. It was perfect. Mara found lodging in a boarding house run by a woman named Branna Colt, a widow herself, sharp-eyed and broad-shouldered, with gray hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked painful. "You running from something or toward something?" Branna asked as she showed Mara to a room on the second floor. "Does it matter?" "Not to me, long as you pay on time and don't bring trouble." Mara set her trunk down and looked around. The room was barely 10 feet across, with a bed, a chair, a washstand, and a window that overlooked the harbor. It was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. "I can pay," she said, "and I don't want trouble." Branna studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. Supper's at 6. You'll eat with the rest of us, or not at all?" "I'll be there." Branna turned to go, then paused in the doorway. "You got a trade, girl?" "No." "Then you'll learn one. No one survives winter here without working." And she was gone. Mara learned fast. She learned to gut fish with a knife that was always sharper than she expected. She learned to mend nets, to salt cod, to haul water from the well when the pump froze. She learned that Branna's boarding house was also a kind of refuge, a place where women who'd run out of options came to rebuild. There was Nell, who'd fled an abusive husband and now worked the docks loading cargo. There was Iris, a girl of 16 who'd gotten pregnant and been thrown out by her family. There was old Kath, who'd outlived 3 husbands and claimed the sea would take her when it was damn well ready. They didn't ask Mara about her past, and she didn't ask about theirs. Winter came early that year. By mid-November, the wind off the ocean was sharp enough to cut skin, and the harbor froze at the edges. The fishing boats went out less often, and the village hunkered down into a rhythm of survival, wood chopped, food stored, bodies kept warm by work and proximity. Mara's belly grew, slowly at first, then all at once. By December, there was no hiding it. She let out the seams on her dresses, wore shawls layered thick, and kept working because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering. Branna watched her with the eyes of a woman who'd seen everything twice. "You planning to keep it?" she asked one night over stew. Mara looked up, startled. "Of course. Just checking. Some don't." "I want this baby." Branna nodded. "Then you'll need help. Birth isn't something you do alone." "I know." "Do you?" Mara met her gaze. "No, but I'll learn." Branna's mouth twitched into something that might have been a smile. "You're tougher than you look, Mara Hale." "I have to be." But far to the south, in the grand halls of Stormhaven Manor, Rowan Ashcroft was beginning to realize something had gone very, very wrong. His wife had been missing for 6 weeks. At first, he hadn't noticed. Elena's absence was so Chang routine that it took the head housekeeper asking about her wardrobe storage for him to realize he hadn't seen her at meals in days, then weeks. A search of her chambers revealed nothing missing except some plain dresses and a single traveling trunk. No note, no letter, no explanation, just gone. He'd sent men to her family estate first. The Viramonts claimed ignorance. Too eagerly, he thought, but they had nothing to gain by hiding her. Then the cities, the coaching inns, the ports. Nothing. It was as if the Duchess of Ashcroft had simply evaporated, and for the first time in his life, Rowan felt something he didn't recognize. Not anger, not inconvenience, fear. He stood in her sitting room, the one where he'd kissed Isabel, the one where Elena had stood in the doorway and said nothing, and tried to understand. Why would she leave? She had everything. Wealth, status, protection. He'd given her a title women would kill for. What more could she possibly want? The question ate at him. He sent more men, hired investigators, offered rewards. And in the dark, quiet hours when he couldn't sleep, he remembered the way she'd looked at him that night. Not angry, not hurt, just empty. Like she'd already decided he didn't matter. And for reasons he couldn't name, that haunted him more than her absence ever could. In Greymoor, Mara Hale learned to survive winter. She learned that cold was a living thing, that hunger was negotiable, that exhaustion could be endured if you had a reason. Her reason kicked her ribs at night and made her crave pickled herring at dawn. She worked until her hands bled, then wrapped them and worked more. She listened to Branna's stories about the sea and Nell's advice about childbirth and Iris's fears about motherhood. And slowly, painfully, she became someone new. Not Elena, the silent duchess. Not a Viramont, the ruined daughter. Just Mara, a woman who'd chosen survival over submission. And when the snow fell heavy in January and the baby moved strong inside her, she stood at the cliffs and looked out at the frozen sea and thought, "He'll never find me here. And even if he does, I'm not going back." She was wrong about him never finding her. The mistake came in February, during the worst storm Greymoor had seen in a decade. The kind of storm that turned the harbor into a thrashing monster and sent fishermen scrambling to secure boats that bucked against their moorings like wild horses. Mara was 7 months pregnant by then. Her belly so round she had to lean back when she walked to keep her balance. Branna had forbidden her from working the docks weeks ago, but there were still tasks: mending, cooking, keeping the fire fed in the boarding house common room where the women gathered to wait out the wind. The storm hit on a Tuesday afternoon. One moment the sky was gray and heavy. The next it opened up like something had torn it apart from the inside. "Get inside!" Branna shouted from the doorway, her voice barely audible over the roar. "Nell! Iris! Now!" They'd been securing shutters, but the wind was already ripping them from hinges. Nell grabbed Iris by the arm and hauled her toward the house, both of them soaked through in seconds. Mara stood at the window watching the harbor churn. Waves crashed over the pier, swallowing it whole, then pulling back only to hit again. A fishing boat had broken loose and was smashing itself to pieces against the rocks. You shouldn't be on your feet, Branna said, appearing at her shoulder with a blanket. Sit down before you fall down. I'm fine. You're 7 months gone and swaying like a drunk. Sit. Mara sat. The baby was moving, restless and uncomfortable, pressing against her ribs in a way that made breathing difficult. She wrapped the blanket around herself and tried to ignore the spike of anxiety that came with every crack of thunder. The storm lasted 18 hours. When it finally broke, just after dawn, the village was a wreck. Roofs torn off, fences flattened, the pier half destroyed. 3 boats lost. No deaths, miraculously, but enough damage that everyone who could walk was already outside assessing what could be saved and what was simply gone. Mara helped where she could, mostly by staying out of the way and making endless pots of tea for the workers who came in shivering and exhausted. She didn't see the stranger until midday. He arrived on horseback, alone, picking his way carefully through the muddy streets like he wasn't sure the ground would hold. He wore a dark coat and riding boots, both expensive, both completely wrong for a place like Greymore. Nell saw him first. Who the hell is that? Mara looked up from the pot she was stirring and felt her heart stop. She didn't recognize his face, but she recognized the quality of his clothes, the way he sat in the saddle like someone who'd been born to it, the deliberate precision of his movements. Nobility, or someone in their employ. Probably a merchant, Branna said, squinting through the window. Storm might have blown him off course. But Mara knew better. She set down the spoon very carefully and walked toward the back door. Mara? Iris's voice concerned. You all right? I need air. She made it outside before her knees gave out. The alley behind the boarding house was narrow and littered with debris from the storm, broken crates, shingles, a shattered barrel that still smelled like fish. Mara braced herself against the wall and forced her breathing to slow. He'd found her. Or someone had. It didn't matter which. The result was the same. She pressed both hands to her belly and felt the baby shift, a slow roll that was almost reassuring. Almost. You can't take her, she whispered. I won't let you. The baby kicked hard, like agreement. Mara closed her eyes and tried to think. She had money. Not much, but enough to buy passage on a ship if she needed to run again. She had friends here, maybe, people who might hide her if she asked. Or she could stay. Brazen it out. Pretend to be exactly who she'd claimed. A widow named Mara Hale, with no connection to anything or anyone south of here. She was still deciding when the back door opened and Branna stepped out. You look like you've seen a ghost. Mara didn't answer. Branna came closer, her expression unreadable. That man asking questions at the tavern. You know him? No. But you know who sent him. It wasn't a question. Mara met her eyes and saw no judgment there. Just calculation. Branna was a woman who understood survival, who'd probably run from something herself once. If I told you I needed to leave tonight, Mara said quietly, would you help me? Branna was silent for a long moment. Then she shook her head. You're in no shape to travel. Storm wrecked half the roads, and you're a month from giving birth. You wouldn't make it 10 miles. Then what do I do? You let me handle it. Branna, you're not the first woman to show up here with a secret, Mara, and you won't be the last. I know how to deal with nosy strangers. Mara wanted to argue, wanted to explain that this wasn't just some man asking questions, that the people looking for her had money and power and patience. But her body was exhausted, her mind too scattered to plan, and Branna was already walking back toward the boarding house with the confidence of someone who'd made up her mind. Mara followed because she didn't know what else to do. Inside, the stranger was standing in the common room, dripping onto the floor, while Nell glared at him like he was a rat that had wandered in from the street. He was younger than Mara expected, maybe 30, with dark hair and a face that was handsome in an unremarkable way. He had the look of someone who worked for money, not title, a hired man, not a lord. I'm looking for someone, he was saying, a woman. She may have passed through here a few months ago. A lot of women pass through, Branna said, her tone flat. You'll have to be more specific. She would have been traveling alone, well-dressed, even if she was trying not to be. Probably using a false name. Nell snorted. Half the people in this village are using false names. It's not a crime. The man's jaw tightened. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need information. And we don't have any, Branna said. So unless you're planning to pay for a room, you can get back on your horse and try the next village. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small purse. The coins inside clinked heavily. I can pay, for the room and the information. Branna didn't even look at the purse. Money doesn't buy what doesn't exist. Mara stood very still in the doorway, trying to make herself small. The stranger's eyes swept the room once, passing over her without pausing. She was just another pregnant woman in a house full of them. Unremarkable. Invisible. For once, invisibility felt like safety. The man sighed and pocketed the purse. If anyone remembers anything, I'll be at the tavern for the next 2 days. There's more money for useful information. I'm sure there is, Branna said. Doors behind you. He left without another word. The moment the door closed, Nell let out a breath. Well, that was subtle. Who do you think sent him? Iris asked, her voice hushed. Someone with money to burn, Branna said. She turned to look at Mara, her expression carefully neutral. You should rest. Upstairs. Mara nodded and climbed the stairs on shaking legs. In her room, she locked the door and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. 2 days. She had 2 days before the man gave up and moved on, or before someone in the village decided that money was worth more than loyalty to a stranger. She had 2 days to decide if she was going to run or fight, or something else entirely. The baby kicked again, insistent. I know, Mara whispered. I know. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat by the window and watched the harbor, dark and quiet now after the storm. The boats were being repaired, piece by piece. The village was rebuilding, and Mara realized something that made her chest tighten with a feeling she couldn't name. She didn't want to run anymore. She was tired. Tired of looking over her shoulder, tired of lying, tired of being afraid that every stranger was a threat. She'd spent 3 years in Stormhaven being invisible, and she'd spent the last 4 months in Greymoor becoming real. She wasn't going to give that up, not for Rowan, not for anyone. But she also wasn't stupid. If the man at the tavern was asking questions, it meant Rowan knew she'd come north. He didn't know exactly where yet, but he was getting closer, and when he found her, because he would eventually, she needed to be ready. The next morning, Mara went to see the midwife. Her name was Constance, a woman in her 60s who'd delivered half the babies in Greymoor and buried the other half's mothers. She lived in a small cottage on the edge of the village, surrounded by herbs and drying plants that smelled like earth and something sharper. You're early, Constance said when she opened the door. Not due for another month at least. I know. I need to ask you something. Constance stepped aside to let her in. The cottage was warm, cluttered, lived in. Mara sat in the chair by the fire and tried to organize her thoughts. If I had the baby early, she said slowly. How early is too early? Constance raised an eyebrow. Planning to rush things? Just preparing. For what? Mara hesitated. Constance was practical, discreet, and had no reason to care about the politics of Southern nobility. But trust was still a gamble. There's a man looking for me, she said finally. He doesn't know I'm here yet, but he will, and when he does, I can't be pregnant anymore. Constance studied her for a long moment. You think having the baby will make you safer? I think having the baby means I'm not carrying evidence anymore. Evidence of what? That I ran, that I'm not where I'm supposed to be, that I took something that didn't belong to me. The baby? Mara nodded. Constance sat down across from her, her expression thoughtful. A month early isn't ideal, but it's survivable. I've delivered plenty at 8 months, but you can't force it, girl. Bodies don't work that way. What if I didn't force it? What if I just helped it along? That's dangerous. So is getting dragged back to a place I'd rather die than return to. Constance was quiet for a long time. Then she stood and walked to a shelf lined with jars and bottles. She pulled down 3, one filled with dried leaves, one with dark powder, one with something that looked like tree bark. This is raspberry leaf, she said, setting them on the table. Strengthens the womb. This is black cohosh. Can bring on labor if the body's ready. And this is shepherd's purse for after. Stops bleeding. Mara stared at the jars. Will it work? Maybe, maybe not. And if it does, it'll hurt like hell. I don't care. Constance gave her a look that was equal parts pity and respect. You're braver than you look, Mara Hale. Or stupider. Same thing, most days. Constance wrapped the jars in cloth and handed them over. Steep the raspberry leaf in tea, drink it 3 times a day. The cohosh, only if you're sure. A pinch in hot water, no more. And the shepherd's purse is for after the birth. You'll know when you need it. Mara tucked the bundle into her coat. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You might curse my name before this is over. I'll take that risk. As Mara stood to leave, Constance caught her arm. Whatever you're running from, she said quietly, make sure you know what you're running toward. Because a baby doesn't fix things. It just makes them harder. I know, Mara said. But she's mine, and no one gets to take her from me. Constance nodded slowly. Then you'll do fine. Mara walked back to the boarding house with the jars hidden under her coat and a plan forming in her mind. She would have the baby early. Not dangerously early, but early enough that when Rowan's man, or Rowan himself, finally tracked her down, there would be no question of taking her back. A woman with a newborn couldn't travel, couldn't be moved, couldn't be dragged across the country without risking both their lives. It was a gamble, a reckless, desperate gamble. But it was hers. That night she started drinking the raspberry leaf tea. It tasted like earth and bitterness, but she drank it anyway. 3 times a day, just like Constance said. The man at the tavern stayed for his 2 days, asking questions that no one answered. On the 3rd morning, he rode out of Graymore heading east, and Mara watched from the window as he disappeared into the fog. But she knew he'd be back, or someone else would come. Rowan wasn't the kind of man who gave up. A week later, the contractions started. Not labor, not yet, but a tightening in her belly that came and went like a warning. Constance checked her and nodded grimly. Your body's getting ready. Another week, maybe 2. But the baby's dropping. She's coming whether you're ready or not. Mara was ready. She prepared the way soldiers prepare for battle. She washed her sheets, boiled water, laid out cloths and towels. She told Branna and Nell and Iris what to expect, and they listened without questions because women in Graymore understood that survival sometimes required silence. On the 15th of March, the contractions turned real. They started just after dawn, a low, rolling ache that wrapped around her back and squeezed. Mara was in the kitchen when the first one hit, and she had to grip the counter to stay upright. Iris saw her face. Is it, yes. I'll get Constance. The midwife arrived within the hour, took one look at Mara and nodded. Upstairs, now. The labor lasted 14 hours. 14 hours of pain that rewrote Mara's understanding of what a body could endure. Constance had warned her it would hurt, but nothing prepared her for the reality of it. The way the contractions built and broke like waves, the way her body stopped being hers and became something else entirely. Branna stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand and telling her to breathe, to push, to rest, to push again. You're doing fine, Branna said, her voice steady even when Mara screamed. She's almost here. I can't. You can. You will. And she did. At 8:30 in the evening, with the sun setting red over the harbor, Mara's daughter was born. She came out screaming, furious and alive, her face red and wrinkled and perfect. Constance caught her, wiped her down, and placed her on Mara's chest. Healthy girl, small but strong. Mara looked down at the tiny squirming thing in her arms and felt something break open inside her chest. Love. Fierce and irrational and overwhelming. Hello, she whispered, her voice shaking. I'm your mother. The baby's eyes opened, dark and unfocused, and Mara thought, You're mine. You're mine and no one can take you. Branna leaned over, smiling. She's beautiful. What's her name? Mara hadn't thought about it, hadn't let herself think about it because naming her made it real. But now, holding her daughter, feeling the weight of her, the warmth of her, there was only one name that felt right. Elara, she said softly. Her name is Elara. Elara Hale, Branna repeated. It suits her. Constance finished cleaning up, gave Mara instructions about feeding and healing, and left with a warning to rest. But Mara didn't rest. She lay in bed with Elara curled against her chest, listening to the tiny hitching breaths, and made silent promises. I will keep you safe. I will teach you to be strong. I will never let anyone make you feel small. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. And somewhere far to the south, Rowan Ashcroft received word that the search had narrowed. A village on the northern coast, a woman matching the description, a boarding house run by a widow who didn't answer questions. He read the report twice, then stood and walked to the window of his study. For 4 months, he'd been haunted by her absence. Not because he missed her, he told himself it wasn't that, but because the not knowing was unbearable. Where had she gone? Why had she left? And what did it say about him that his own wife would rather disappear than stay? The questions had eaten at him, night after night, until he couldn't sleep, couldn't think, couldn't focus on anything but the empty space she'd left behind. He'd told himself he wanted her back because of duty, because an Ashcroft Duchess didn't simply vanish, because there were expectations, appearances, legacies to maintain. But the truth, which he was only now beginning to admit, was simpler and uglier. He wanted her back because losing her made him feel powerless, and Rowan Ashcroft had never been powerless in his life. He called for his horse. "Your Grace," his steward said, appearing in the doorway. "It's past dark. The roads—" "I'll leave at dawn." "To go where?" Rowan looked at him, and the steward took a step back. "North," Rowan said. "I'm going north." In Greymoor, Mara woke to the sound of Alara crying. It was the third time that night. Her body ached, her breasts were sore, and exhaustion sat on her like a weight she couldn't lift. But she picked up her daughter anyway, held her close, and whispered, I know. I've got you." Alara quieted, her tiny fist curling around Mara's finger. And Mara realized with a clarity that was almost frightening that she would kill for this child. Not metaphorically, not dramatically. Actually kill. If Rowan came. If he tried to take Alara, tried to claim her, tried to drag them both back to Stormhaven, Mara would stop him, however she had to. She looked down at her daughter's sleeping face and felt something harden inside her chest. She wasn't the silent Duchess anymore. She was a mother. And mothers, she was learning, were capable of anything. 3 days later, a rider arrived in Greymoor. Not the hired man from before. This one was different, taller, broader, with gray eyes that swept the village like he was cataloging every detail. Branna saw him first and came upstairs to warn her. "He's here," she said quietly. "The one you've been waiting for." Mara stood by the window, Alara asleep in her arms, and looked down at the street. Rowan Ashcroft dismounted his horse and stood in the mud of Greymoor like a king surveying a conquered land, and Mara felt her heart turn to ice. He looked smaller than she remembered. Not physically. Rowan was still tall, still carried himself with the kind of rigid posture that came from a lifetime of being told he mattered. But standing in the middle of Greymoor's main street, mud splattered up to his knees, expensive coat dark with rain, he looked like exactly what he was, a man out of place. Mara watched from the second-floor window, Alara's warm weight solid against her chest, and felt nothing. No fear, no anger, not even satisfaction, just a cold, empty certainty that this moment had been inevitable from the start. Branna stood beside her, arms crossed. "You want me to send him away?" "He won't go." "Then what do you want to do?" Mara adjusted Alara carefully, making sure the blanket covered her completely. The baby was 3 days old, still so small she barely seemed real. Her daughter, her blood, her choice. "I'll talk to him," Mara said, "but not here, and not alone." "Where?" "The docks. Public enough that he can't make a scene, isolated enough that we can speak plainly." She looked at Branna. "Will you come with me?" Branna's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, approval, maybe, or recognition. "Of course. And if things go wrong, they won't." "If they do," Mara said firmly, "take Alara. Get her out of here. There's money sewn into the lining of my trunk. Enough to get you both passage on a ship going anywhere." "Mara, promise me." Branna held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "I promise. But it won't come to that." Mara wasn't so sure. She dressed carefully, choosing the plainest dress she owned. Brown wool, patched at the elbows. Nothing that marked her as anything other than what she'd become. She braided her hair simply, washed her face, looked at herself in the cracked mirror above the washstand. The woman looking back was a stranger. Thinner than she'd been in Stormhaven, harder around the edges, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult choices. But her gaze was steady. Elena Vieramont would have been terrified. Mara Hale was ready. She handed Alara to Iris, who took the baby with the practiced ease of someone who'd grown up in a house full of children. "Keep her quiet," Mara said, "and keep her safe." "I will." Iris's voice was soft but certain. "Go do what you need to do." Mara nodded and followed Branna downstairs. Rowan was waiting in the common room. He'd removed his coat and was standing by the fire, hands clasped behind his back, looking around the space with barely concealed distaste. When Mara entered, his head snapped toward her, and for just a second, less than a heartbeat, something crossed his face that might have been relief. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold mask she knew so well. Elena. Her name in his mouth felt like a slap. "That's not my name anymore," she said quietly. His jaw tightened. "We need to talk." "Then talk. But not here." She walked past him without waiting for a response and pushed through the front door into the cold March air. The sky was heavy with clouds, threatening rain, and the wind off the ocean cut through her dress like a blade. Rowan followed, Branna close behind. They walked in silence through the muddy streets, past fishermen hauling nets and children playing in puddles, and women hanging laundry that would never dry in this weather. No one looked twice at them. In Graymore, everyone minded their own business. The docks were mostly empty, just a few boats tied up and rocking gently in the swell. Mara led them to the far end, where the pier jutted out over dark water, and turned to face him. "You shouldn't have come," she said. Rowan stared at her like he was seeing a ghost. "You disappeared for 4 months. No word, no explanation. What did you expect me to do?" "Move on." He flinched, actually flinched. "You're my wife." "I was your possession. There's a difference." "That's not—" He stopped, ran a hand through his hair in a gesture that looked almost like frustration. "You don't understand. When I realized you were gone, when you noticed," Mara corrected, "it took you 6 weeks to even realize I wasn't there." Silence. Rowan opened his mouth, closed it, looked away. Branna leaned against a piling, watching them both with the detached interest of someone observing a play. "Why did you leave?" Rowan asked finally, his voice quieter. Mara almost laughed. "You're asking me that? Really?" "Yes, because I was invisible. Because you paraded mistresses through our home and didn't care that I could see. Because you treated me like furniture, useful when needed, ignored the rest of the time. Because I was dying in that house, Rowan, and you never even noticed." He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw something flicker behind the coldness. Confusion, maybe. Or the beginning of understanding. "I gave you everything," he said. "You gave me nothing that mattered. A title, wealth, security, a cage." Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. She curled them into fists. "And I would have stayed in it, if that's all it was. But then you brought her into my rooms, into my space, and you looked at me like I was the intruder." Rowan's face went pale. "Isabel, I don't care what her name was. She was just one of many." Mara took a breath. "That night, I realized something. I could stay and become a ghost. Or I could leave and become a person. So I left. Without telling me. You didn't deserve to know." The words hung between them like a guillotine blade. Rowan took a step closer, and Branna straightened, ready to intervene. But he stopped, hands raised slightly in something that looked almost like surrender. "Come back," he said. "No." "Elena, my name is Mara. That's not your name. That's not who you are. It's who I chose to be, and that makes it more real than anything you ever gave me." His expression twisted into something ugly. "You think you can just walk away? You're the Duchess of Ashcroft. That doesn't disappear because you decided to play peasant in some fishing village. Watch me. The marriage is binding. Legally, you're still mine. Then divorce me." He stared at her like she'd suggested burning down the manor. "That's not— You can't— Why not? You don't love me. You never did. And I sure as hell don't love you, so end it. Sign the papers. Let me go." "It's not that simple." "It could be. The scandal, would be yours to deal with, not mine." Rowan shook his head slowly, almost wonderingly. "You've changed." "Yes. I don't recognize you." "Don't— Good." Mara wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. "The woman you married doesn't exist anymore. She died the night you brought your mistress into her rooms and didn't even have the decency to pretend it mattered." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of salt and fish and rain. A gull screamed overhead. The boat behind them creaked against its mooring. Then Rowan said, very quietly, "I'm sorry." Mara blinked. "What?" I said, "I'm sorry." He wasn't looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the water, his jaw tight. I never thought about what it was like for you. I should have. It was possibly the first genuine thing he'd ever said to her, and it changed nothing. "Thank you," Mara said, and meant it. "But I'm still not coming back." His head snapped up. "Then what do you want?" "I want you to leave. Go back to Stormhaven, tell everyone I'm dead, and forget I ever existed." "I can't do that." "Why not?" He hesitated, and in that hesitation, Mara saw something shift, a decision being made, a line being crossed. "Because you're carrying my child," he said. The world tilted. Mara's heart stopped, restarted, stuttered. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Branna stepped forward, her hand moving to the knife at her belt. "How did you—" "The physician," Rowan said, still watching Mara. "Dr. Hollis, he kept records. When I was searching for you, I went through everything. Your medical history. The last entry was dated 2 days before you disappeared." He paused. 8 weeks pregnant. Mara felt the blood drain from her face. "That was 4 months ago," Rowan continued, his voice gaining strength. "Which means you're, what, 7 months now? 8? You can't hide it forever, Elena, and you can't keep my heir from me. She's not yours." The words came out before she could stop them. Rowan went very still. "What did you say?" "I said she's not yours. She's mine." "She?" His eyes widened. "You've already, 3 days ago, a girl, healthy, perfect, and she has nothing to do with you." "The hell she doesn't." Rowan's composure shattered. "That's my daughter." "You have no daughter. You have a wife who left you and a child you'll never meet." "You can't do this." "I already did." He lunged forward, and Branna moved between them so fast Mara barely saw it. The knife was out, the point pressed against Rowan's chest hard enough to dent fabric. "Step back," Branna said, her voice like iron. "Now." Rowan froze, hands raised. "I'm not going to hurt her." "You've done nothing but hurt her for 3 years. So yes, you are going to step back, and you're going to listen." Slowly, Rowan retreated. Branna lowered the knife but didn't put it away. Mara's legs were shaking so badly she thought she might collapse. She locked her knees and forced herself to stay upright. "You want to know why I didn't tell you I was pregnant?" she said, her voice trembling. "Because I knew you'd do exactly this. You'd decide the baby was yours, that you had some claim, some right, but you don't. You were never a husband. You'll never be a father. You're just a man who thinks ownership is the same as love." "That's not fair. Life isn't fair, Rowan. You taught me that." He looked at her with something that might have been anguish. "Let me see her, just once, please." "No." "Elena." "No!" The word tore out of her, raw and ragged. "You don't get to ask me for anything. You don't get to play the wounded party. You made your choices. Every single day for 3 years you chose to ignore me, to humiliate me, to make me feel worthless. And now you want me to hand over my daughter so you can what? Claim her? Parade her around as the Ashcroft heir? Turn her into another pawn in your family's endless game? I wouldn't." "You would. Because that's all you know how to do." Rowan's face twisted. "I came here to bring you home." "I am home." "This?" He gestured at the village around them, his voice dripping with contempt. "This is nothing. A fishing village full of people who will be dead or destitute in 10 years. You think you can raise an Ashcroft heir here?" "She's not an Ashcroft," Mara said coldly. "Her name is Alara Hale, and she'll grow up knowing she's worth more than a title." Something in Rowan's expression cracked. "You can't erase me." "I can try. I'll fight you, legally. I have resources you can't imagine. I'll drag this through every court in the country if I have to." "Then do it." Mara stepped forward, ignoring Branna's warning hand on her arm. "Take me to court. Spend your money. Ruin your reputation. But know this. If you try to take my daughter, I will disappear again. And this time, you'll never find me. You can't run forever. Watch me." They stared at each other across the space between them, former husband and wife, jailer and escapee. 2 people who'd once stood before witnesses and promised things neither of them understood. Then Rowan's shoulders sagged, just slightly, and Mara saw it. Defeat. Not total, not permanent, but real. "I need time," he said quietly, "to think." "You can have all the time you want, as long as you take it somewhere else." "I'm staying in the village, at the tavern." "Fine, but if you come near the boarding house, Branna will gut you before you reach the door." Branna smiled. She's not exaggerating. Rowan looked between them, then nodded once. 3 days. I'll give you 3 days. And then we talk again. There's nothing left to talk about. We'll see. He turned and walked away, his boots loud on the wooden pier. Mara watched him go until he was out of sight, then her legs finally gave out. Branna caught her before she hit the ground, strong arms holding her upright. I've got you, Branna murmured. You did good. He knows, Mara whispered. He knows about Alara. And he can't do anything about it. He'll try. Let him try. Branna helped her stand. You're not alone in this, Mara. You've got me. You've got Nell and Iris and half the women in this village. He's one man with money. We're a community. Money doesn't mean much here. Mara wanted to believe her, but she'd lived in Rowan's world long enough to know that money meant everything, everywhere. They walked back to the boarding house in silence. When they arrived, Iris met them at the door, Alara bundled in her arms. She's been fussing, Iris said. I think she's hungry. Mara took her daughter, felt the warm weight settle against her chest, and everything else fell away. Hello, sweet girl, she whispered. I'm sorry I left. I'm here now. Alara's tiny mouth opened in a yawn, and Mara felt tears prick her eyes. Branna squeezed her shoulder once, then left her alone. Upstairs, Mara sat in the rocking chair by the window and nursed Alara, watching the sky darken outside. The baby fed hungrily, her small fists kneading against Mara's skin, and Mara let herself cry quietly while her daughter drank. She'd thought seeing Rowan would feel like victory. Instead, it just felt like grief. Grief for the girl she'd been when she married him, so hopeful and naive. Grief for the 3 years she'd lost trying to become someone he might notice. Grief for the fact that even now, even free, she couldn't escape him completely. Because he knew. And he wasn't going to let this go. When Alara fell asleep, milk-drunk and peaceful, Mara carried her to the bed and lay down beside her. She traced the curve of her daughter's cheek with one finger and made a silent vow. Whatever Rowan did next, court battles, threats, force, she would be ready. She would protect this child with everything she had, even if it meant destroying herself in the process. The next morning, Rowan sent a letter. It was delivered by a village boy who looked terrified and clutched the envelope like it might explode. Branna took it, paid the boy double what he was owed, and brought it upstairs. You don't have to read it, she said, setting it on the table. Mara looked at the envelope. Thick paper, sealed with the Ashcroft crest stamped in red wax. Even here, even now, he couldn't help but remind her of who he was. Yes, I do. She broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was Rowan's, precise, controlled, each letter perfectly formed. Elena, I understand your anger. I deserve it. But I cannot walk away from my child, regardless of what you believe I deserve. I am proposing a compromise. Allow me to remain in Greymore for 1 month. I will not approach you or the baby unless you permit it. I will work, like anyone else, to earn my keep. I will prove to you that I am capable of change. If at the end of that month you still want me gone, I will leave. I will sign whatever documents you wish, divorce, renunciation of paternity, anything. You will be free. But if I can show you that I am not the man you left, that I can be better, then perhaps we can find a different path forward. Not as Duke and Duchess, as two people trying to do right by their daughter. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am asking for a chance. Armara read it twice, then handed it to Branna without a word. Branna scanned it quickly, her expression unreadable. What do you want to do? I don't know. He's asking for a month. I know. Do you trust him? No. Then why are you considering it? Mara looked down at Alara, asleep in the cradle beside the bed. Because what if he's telling the truth? What if he could change? People don't change, Mara. Not like that. Maybe not, but... She hesitated, trying to put words to the feeling growing in her chest. Alara deserves to know her father. Even if he's terrible. Even if I hate him, she deserves the choice. She's 3 days old. She doesn't get a choice yet. Then I'm making it for her. Mara took a breath. 1 month. He stays, he works, he proves himself. And if he can't, if he tries anything, if he steps out of line even once, he leaves and never comes back. You're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Branna studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. I'll send word to the tavern, but he works under my supervision. And if I say he's done, he's done. Agreed. Mara picked up a pen and wrote a single word on the back of Rowan's letter. Yes. Then she sealed it and sent it back before she could change her mind. That afternoon, Rowan Ashcroft reported to the docks. He arrived wearing work clothes, plain trousers, a rough shirt, boots that looked too new, and stood awkwardly at the edge of the pier like he wasn't sure what to do with his hands. Branna looked him up and down with the expression of someone evaluating livestock. You ever worked a day in your life? No. Thought not. She handed him a coil of rope. You're on net repair. Nell will show you how. Nell, who'd been mending a tear in one of the big fishing nets, looked up and grinned. Oh, this is going to be fun. Rowan took the rope without comment and followed her to the work area. Mara watched from the window of the boarding house, Alara asleep against her shoulder, and felt something twist in her chest. It might have been hope. It might have been fear. Probably both. The first week was a disaster. Rowan had no idea how to do anything. He couldn't tie knots, couldn't splice rope, couldn't tell the difference between cod and haddock. He moved too slowly, asked too many questions, and got in everyone's way. But he kept showing up. Every morning at dawn, he was at the docks. Every evening at dusk, he left covered in fish guts and salt spray and exhaustion. Nell reported back to Mara each night. He's useless, she said cheerfully, but he's trying. I'll give him that. Is he complaining? Not once, though I saw him wince when he picked up a net this morning. Pretty sure his hands are blistered to hell. Mara felt no sympathy. By the second week, Rowan started to improve. He learned the knots. He learned to move efficiently. He even started anticipating what needed to be done before Nell had to tell him. And he never once asked to see Alara. Mara didn't know what to do with that. She'd expected him to push, to demand, to use the agreement as leverage. But he didn't. He worked, he kept his distance, and he honored his word. It was unsettling. On the 15th day, Mara saw him at the market. She was buying vegetables, Alara strapped to her chest in a sling Iris had made, when she felt someone's gaze on her. She turned and found Rowan standing 10 feet away, his eyes fixed on the baby. He looked different. Thinner, darker from the sun, with calluses on his hands and tiredness in his face that made him seem almost human. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Rowan did something she never expected. He smiled, small, sad, sincere, and walked away without a word. Mara stood frozen, her heart pounding, Alara warm and solid against her chest. And she realized, with a clarity that terrified her, that she didn't know who Rowan Ashcroft was anymore. The man she'd married would never have smiled like that, would never have walked away, would never have worked himself bloody for the chance to prove something. Which meant either he was lying, performing some elaborate manipulation, or he was changing, and Mara didn't know which possibility scared her more. That night, she couldn't sleep. She paced the room with Alara, humming softly, trying to settle the anxiety churning in her gut. At midnight, there was a knock on the door. Mara froze. Who is it? It's me. Rowan's voice muffled through the wood. I need to talk to you. It's the middle of the night. I know, please. She should have sent him away. Instead, she opened the door. Rowan stood in the hallway, soaking wet. It was pouring outside, the rain drumming on the roof like 1,000 tiny hammers. There's a boat, he said without preamble. One of the fishing boats. It's taking on water. The storm caught them off guard and they can't make it back to harbor. Branna is organizing a rescue, but they need every hand. Mara's stomach dropped. How many people? 4, maybe 5. Can they swim? I don't know. He looked at her and his eyes were clear. I'm going out with the rescue crew. I wanted you to know. In case... He didn't finish. Mara felt her grip tighten on the doorframe. You don't know how to sail. I know how to pull a rope. That's enough. You could die. So could they. Why are you telling me this? Because if something happens... He stopped, swallowed hard. I need you to know I tried. I need Alara to know. And before Mara could respond, he turned and ran down the stairs. She stood in the doorway, holding her sleeping daughter, listening to the storm rage outside. And she made a decision that would have horrified the woman she'd been 4 months ago. Iris, she shouted, I need you. Iris appeared within seconds, bleary-eyed. What's wrong? Mara thrust Alara into her arms. Watch her. Don't let anyone in. I'll be back. Where are you going? But Mara was already moving, grabbing her coat, running down the stairs and out into the rain. The docks were chaos. Men shouting, lanterns swinging wildly in the wind, waves crashing over the pier with enough force to knock someone off their feet. Branna was coordinating from the harbor master's office, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. 2 boats! One crew pulls them in, the other stands by in case we need backup. Move! Mara found Rowan hauling rope onto one of the rescue boats, his face set with determination. You're insane! She shouted over the wind. He looked up, startled. What are you doing here? Stopping you from killing yourself. I'm going. Then I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. You don't get to tell me what to do anymore, Rowan. If you're going out there, so am I. You have a daughter, and you have a death wish. She grabbed his arm. You don't know these waters. You don't know how to read a storm. You'll get yourself killed and everyone else with you. Branna appeared beside them, rain streaming down her face. She's right. You're not going. Someone has to, and it won't be you. Branna pointed at the boat. Get off. Mara, you too. This isn't amateur hour. I've been sailing these waters my whole life, Nell said, appearing with a coil of rope over her shoulder. I'll go. Kath and Theo are already on board. Rowan looked like he wanted to argue, but Branna's expression left no room for debate. Fine, he said finally, but I'm staying here, in case you need help when they get back. Branna nodded. Good enough. The rescue boat launched into the storm, lanterns swinging, and disappeared into the darkness. Mara and Rowan stood side by side on the pier, soaked to the bone, watching the place where it had vanished. Why did you come? He asked quietly. I don't know. Yes, you do. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the Duke of Ashcroft, but a man who'd spent 2 weeks working himself bloody for the chance to be something different. Because Alara deserves better than a dead father, she said. Even one she doesn't know. Is that the only reason? Mara didn't answer. They waited in silence, minutes stretching into eternity, while the storm raged and the sea tried to swallow everything. Then, finally, a light appeared in the darkness. The rescue boat was coming back. Slowly, painfully, but coming. When it reached the pier, 6 people climbed off, the original 4 from the sinking boat, plus Nell and Kath. Everyone was safe. Branna let out a breath that sounded like a prayer, and Mara felt something inside her chest unclench. Rowan grabbed ropes, helped secure the boats, hauled one of the rescued fishermen to safety with hands that were bleeding from broken blisters. He didn't complain, didn't hesitate, just worked until the job was done. When it was over, when everyone was safe and the boats were secured, Mara found him sitting on a piling at the edge of the pier, his head in his hands. She sat down beside him. Thank you, he said without looking up. For what? For caring enough to try and stop me. I was being practical. You were being kind. He lifted his head, and his eyes were red-rimmed. I don't deserve it. No, Mara agreed. You don't. They sat in silence while the storm began to ease, the rain softening to a drizzle. Then Rowan said, very quietly, I want to meet her. Mara's heart stopped. What? Alara. I want to meet my daughter, not to claim her, not to take her, just to know her. For 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. Rowan, please. The word broke on his lips. I know I have no right. I know I've done nothing to earn this. But she's my blood, Elena, and I need to see her just once. Mara looked at him, this man she'd hated, fled from, rebuilt herself to escape, and saw something she'd never expected to see. Vulnerability. Real, raw, terrifying vulnerability. And she realized that the choice she made right now would define everything that came after. All right, she heard herself say. Tomorrow, 5 minutes. In the boarding house with Branna present. And if you upset her, you're done. Rowan's eyes widened. You mean it? I mean it, but this doesn't change anything between us. I know. And it doesn't mean I forgive you. I know that too. Mara stood, her legs shaking. Tomorrow, noon, don't be late. She walked away before he could respond, before she could change her mind, before the weight of what she'd just agreed to could crush her. Behind her, Rowan sat alone in the rain and cried for the first time in 20 years. Mara didn't sleep that night either. She lay in bed with Alara curled against her chest, listening to the tiny hitching breaths that meant her daughter was dreaming, and tried to convince herself she hadn't just made a catastrophic mistake. 5 minutes. That's all she'd promised him. But 5 minutes was enough time for Rowan to see Alara's face, to hold her maybe, to feel that primal pull of blood recognizing blood. And once that happened, once he looked at his daughter and felt what fathers were supposed to feel, would he still honor their agreement? Or would he fight for her the way Mara knew he was capable of fighting, ruthless, calculated, with every resource at his disposal? She watched the dawn creep through the window, gray and hesitant, and made herself get up. Alara woke hungry and fussy, and Mara fed her while sitting in the rocking chair trying to memorize every detail. The way her daughter's tiny fingers spread and flexed while she nursed. The small sounds she made, half satisfaction, half complaint. The impossible softness of her skin. If this all went wrong, if Rowan somehow managed to take her... No. Mara wouldn't let herself think that way. She dressed carefully in her best dress, still plain wool, still patched, but clean and pressed. She braided her hair, washed Alara in warm water, wrapped her in the blanket Iris had knitted. At 11:30, Branna knocked on the door. "You ready?" Mara looked down at Alara, who was staring up at her with those dark, unfocused eyes that hadn't yet learned to see the world clearly. "No," she said, "but let's do it anyway." They went downstairs together. The common room had been cleared. Nell and Iris and the other women had made themselves scarce, though Mara knew they were close by, listening. Rowan was already there. He stood by the window, his back to the room, wearing the same work clothes he'd worn to the docks. His hands were bandaged. Mara noticed that immediately. White cloth wrapped around his palms, where the blisters had broken and bled. He turned when he heard them enter, and his face did something complicated when he saw the bundle in Mara's arms. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For this." Mara didn't trust herself to speak. She just nodded. Branna positioned herself between them and the door, arms crossed. The message was clear. Try anything, and you'll have to go through me first. Mara walked closer, her heart hammering so hard she thought Rowan must be able to hear it. "Her name is Alara," she said. "She's 3 weeks old. She's healthy. And she's mine." "I know." Rowan's voice was barely above a whisper. "You can look, but don't touch. Not yet." "All right." Mara shifted the blanket so he could see Alara's face. The baby was awake, her eyes open and searching, one tiny fist pressed against her mouth. She looked impossibly small against the white wool, her dark hair still damp from her bath. Rowan stared at her like he'd forgotten how to breathe. Minutes passed. Neither of them moved. Then, very softly, Rowan said, "She has your eyes." Mara blinked. "What?" "Her eyes. They're the same shape as yours." He looked up, and his expression was raw. "I never noticed before. How beautiful your eyes are." Something in Mara's chest cracked open. "Can I—" Rowan's voice broke. "Can I hold her? Just for a moment?" Every instinct Mara had screamed no. Don't give him that. Don't let him close. Don't risk it. But she looked at his face, at the desperate hope there, the careful way he held himself like he was afraid of breaking something precious, and she found herself nodding. "Sit down first." Rowan sat in the chair by the fire, his movements slow and deliberate. He held out his arms, and Mara saw his hands shaking. She placed Alara in his arms, her own hands hovering, ready to snatch her back at the first sign of danger. But Rowan just held her, carefully, reverently, like she was made of glass. Alara blinked up at him, her expression serious and considering, and Rowan made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Hello," he whispered. "Hello, Alara." The baby yawned, unconcerned with the magnitude of the moment, and Rowan's face crumpled. He was crying, actually crying, silent tears tracking down his face while he held his daughter and looked at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Mara had never seen him cry. In 3 years of marriage, through every humiliation and argument and cold silence, she'd never once seen him show this kind of emotion. "I'm sorry," he said to Alara, his voice thick. "I'm so sorry. I should have been there. I should have been better. I should have—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "I'm going to do better. I promise you. I'm going to be the father you deserve." Mara's vision blurred. She blinked hard, refusing to let herself cry. Branna's expression had softened just slightly. She was still watching Rowan like a hawk, but there was something almost gentle in her eyes now. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Finally, reluctantly, Rowan lifted Alara and handed her back to Mara. "Thank you," he said again. Thank you. Mara took her daughter, felt the familiar weight settle against her chest, and nodded. Your 5 minutes are up. I know. Rowan stood, wiping his face roughly with his sleeve. I should go. Yes. But he didn't move, just stood there, looking at them both, his expression caught between grief and wonder. I meant what I said in the letter, he said finally. If you want me gone at the end of the month, I'll go. I'll sign whatever you want, but I need you to know I don't want to leave, not anymore. What do you want? I want to be part of her life, part of your life, if you'll let me. He paused. Not as your husband. I know that's over, but as something. A friend, maybe. A partner in raising her. I don't know what to call it. You want to co-parent, Mara said slowly, from separate lives. If that's what you'll allow, yes. And if I say no, his jaw tightened. Then I'll respect that. I'll leave. I'll send money for her care, and I'll stay away. But I'll always wonder if I could have been better, if I could have earned your trust. Mara looked at Branna, who raised an eyebrow as if to say, your call. The month isn't over, Mara said finally. You still have 2 weeks. Keep working. Keep proving yourself, and we'll see. That's all I'm asking. He left without another word, and Mara sank into the chair he'd vacated, her legs too weak to hold her. Well, Branna said. That was unexpected. What was? Him being human. Mara laughed, but it came out shaky. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to know. Not yet. Branna moved to the window, watching Rowan's retreating figure. But I'll say this. I've seen a lot of men in my life, Mara. Good ones, bad ones, everything in between. And I've never seen one cry like that over a baby that wasn't even an hour old in his arms. What does that mean? It means maybe he's telling the truth. Maybe he does want to change. She turned back. Or maybe he's just a good actor. Time will tell. That's not comforting. It's not supposed to be, it's just true. Over the next 2 weeks, Rowan worked harder than anyone Mara had ever seen. He was at the docks before dawn and didn't leave until dark. His hands, already blistered and bandaged, cracked and bled, and healed and cracked again. He learned to haul nets, to gut fish without flinching, to splice rope so tight it wouldn't slip under pressure. Nell reported that he'd stopped asking questions and started anticipating needs. That he worked through lunch most days, too focused to eat. That the other fishermen had stopped treating him like a joke and started treating him like one of them. He's earning it, she told Mara over dinner one night. Respect, I mean. It's not given easy here, and he's getting it. What do they think of him? That he's either genuinely trying to be better or he's the most committed liar they've ever met. Nell grinned. Either way, they respect the effort. Mara didn't know what to do with that information. She watched him sometimes, from a distance, saw him moving crates, coiling ropes, laughing at something one of the other men said. He looked different, leaner, darker, with calluses that marked him as someone who worked with his hands. He looked like he belonged here, and that terrified her more than his cruelty ever had. Because if Rowan could change, if he could become someone different, someone better, then what did that mean for everything she'd decided about him? On the 25th day of the month, something shifted. Mara was walking through the market with Ilara strapped to her chest when she heard shouting from the docks. She turned and saw a crowd gathering, people running toward the water. Her stomach dropped. Someone was in trouble. She ran, awkward and unbalanced with the baby, and pushed through the crowd to see what was happening. A boy, maybe 12 years old, had fallen off the pier. The water was choppy, the current strong, and he was flailing, going under and coming up gasping. He can't swim, someone shouted. Where's his father? Get a rope. And then Rowan was moving. He didn't hesitate, didn't think, just kicked off his boots and dove into the water. The crowd went silent. Mara's heart stopped. The water was freezing. The current was vicious. And Rowan was not a strong swimmer. She'd seen him in the bath at Stormhaven, awkward and uncomfortable in water deeper than a few feet. But he swam anyway. He reached the boy in seconds, grabbed him around the chest, and hauled him toward the pier. The boy was panicking, thrashing, and Rowan took an elbow to the jaw that made his head snap back. But he didn't let go. Hands reached down, Nell, Branna, 2 fishermen Mara didn't know, and pulled them both out of the water. The boy was coughing, crying, alive. Rowan was on his hands and knees on the pier, bleeding from the mouth, soaking wet and shaking. You're an idiot, Branna said, kneeling beside him. You could have drowned. He was drowning, Rowan managed through chattering teeth. So you thought you'd join him? I thought I'd stop it. The boy's mother appeared, sobbing, and pulled her son into her arms. Then she turned to Rowan, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she said, her voice breaking. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Rowan shook his head. Anyone would have. No one else moved, Nell interrupted. Just you. The crowd was staring at him now with something that looked like respect. Real respect, not the tentative acceptance he'd been earning through work. Respect that came from knowing he'd risked his life without hesitation to save one of their own. Mara stood frozen, Alara warm against her chest, and felt something inside her shift. This wasn't an act. This wasn't manipulation. This was who Rowan was becoming, or maybe it was who he'd always been, buried under layers of cruelty and entitlement and the weight of a legacy that demanded he be hard. That night, Mara knocked on the door of Rowan's room at the tavern. He answered barefoot, his shirt half-buttoned, a bruise blooming purple along his jaw. Elena, I saw what you did today. It was nothing. It wasn't nothing. You could have died. So could he. Rowan leaned against the doorframe, exhausted. What are you doing here? Mara took a breath. I want to make you an offer. I'm listening. Stay. Not for a month. Permanently. His eyes widened. What? Stay in Greymore. Work the docks. Be part of this community. She shifted Alara slightly, the baby heavy in her arms. And be part of Alara's life, not as the Duke of Ashcroft, as Rowan. Just Rowan. You mean it? I mean it, but there are conditions. Name them. You sign papers renouncing your title. You divorce me legally and publicly. You give up any claim to the Ashcroft fortune beyond what you need to live simply. She met his gaze. And you accept that I will never be your wife again. We are not getting back together. This is about Alara. Only Alara. Rowan was silent for a long moment. Then he said, I'll do it. Just like that? Just like that. He straightened, and despite the exhaustion and the bruise and the salt-stiffened hair, he looked more certain than she'd ever seen him. I don't want the title. I don't want the fortune. I don't want any of it. I want to be someone my daughter can be proud of, and I can't do that as a duke. This isn't temporary, Rowan. You can't come back from this. Your family will disown you. Society will destroy you. You'll be giving up everything. I'm giving up nothing that matters. He looked at her, and his eyes were clear. The only thing that ever mattered was what I lost when you left. I'm not losing it again. Mara felt tears prick her eyes. I can't love you, not after everything. I know. I'm not asking you to. Then what do you want? I want to earn your forgiveness, even if it takes the rest of my life, even if I never get there. He smiled, sad and genuine. I want to be worthy of being Alara's father, that's all. Mara nodded slowly. Then we have an agreement. We do. I'll have Branna draw up the papers. You'll sign them in front of witnesses. I will. And if you ever try to use Alara as leverage or try to claim authority over me or her, the deal is void and you're gone. Understood? Understood. They stood in the doorway, former husband and wife, jailer and escapee, two people who'd caused each other immeasurable pain and were now trying to build something new from the wreckage. Thank you, Rowan said quietly, for giving me this chance. Don't thank me yet. You still have to prove yourself every single day. I will. Mara turned to leave, then paused. The boy you saved today. His name is Finn. His mother is Margot. She works at the bakery. Why are you telling me this? Because if you're going to be part of this community, you need to know the people in it, their names, their stories. She looked back at him. That's what makes a home, Rowan. Not a title, not a fortune. People. I'm learning that. Good. She walked away before the tears could fall, before the weight of what she'd just agreed to could crush her. Behind her, Rowan stood in the doorway and watched her go, his hand pressed against the bruise on his jaw, and thought about how he'd almost drowned today, how the water had closed over his head and the current had pulled him under, and for just a second he'd thought, this is it. But then he'd thought about Alara, about never seeing her again, never holding her, never watching her grow, and he'd fought. He'd fought the water and the cold and his own fear, and he'd won. And now he had a second chance, a real one. He wasn't going to waste it. The next morning, Rowan went to the bakery and bought a loaf of bread. Margot, the boy's mother, was behind the counter. Her eyes widened when she saw him. I wanted to check on Finn, Rowan said. Make sure he's all right. He's fine. Scared himself half to death, but fine. Margot's voice was thick. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me. You saved my son's life. I did what anyone would have done. No, Margot said firmly. You did what no one else was brave enough to do. That matters. Rowan didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and paid for the bread. As he was leaving, Margot called after him. You're staying, aren't you? In Greymore? Yes. Good. She smiled. We need more people like you. Rowan walked out of the bakery with the bread tucked under his arm and tears in his eyes. He'd spent his entire life being told he mattered because of his name, his title, his bloodline. This was the first time anyone had ever said he mattered because of who he was. Over the next week, things began to change. The fishermen who'd barely tolerated Rowan started inviting him for drinks after work. The women at the market smiled when he passed. Children who'd been wary started waving. Greymore was accepting him. And Mara watched it happen with a mixture of pride and fear. Pride, because he was earning it honestly. Fear, because she could feel herself softening toward him, and she didn't know if that was healing or weakness. On the first day of April, the papers arrived. Branna had contacted a solicitor in the nearest city, explained the situation, and commissioned documents that would legally dissolve the marriage and renounce Rowan's claim to both title and fortune. They gathered in the common room of the boarding house. Mara, Rowan, Branna, Nell, and 2 fishermen serving as witnesses. The solicitor, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a professional detachment, read through the documents aloud. By signing this, you, Rowan Ashcroft, Duke of Ashcroft, agree to dissolve your marriage to Elena Viramont, formerly Duchess of Ashcroft, and renounce all claim to the title, lands, and fortune associated with the Ashcroft name. Furthermore, you acknowledge that the child born to Elena Viramont, Alara Hale, is under the sole guardianship of her mother, and you waive all legal rights to custody, visitation, or decision-making authority unless explicitly granted by the mother. Do you understand these terms? Ibenda is kamne. I do, Rowan said, and you agree to them freely without coercion. I do. The solicitor handed him a pen. Rowan signed without hesitation. His handwriting was steady, the signature bold and clear. Then he slid the papers across the table to Mara. She signed too, her hand shaking slightly, and just like that, it was done. The marriage was over. The solicitor collected the documents, promised to file them with the appropriate courts, and left. Silence settled over the room. Well, Nell said finally. That's that. Rowan looked at Mara. What now? Now you prove you meant it. She stood, Alara asleep in her arms. You work. You integrate. You show Alara every day that you're someone worth knowing. I will. And if you ever make me regret this, you won't. I promise you won't. Mara wanted to believe him, and maybe, just maybe, she was starting to. That night, the village threw a celebration. Not for Rowan, though he was part of it, but for the fishing season officially beginning. The boats had been repaired, the nets mended, the weather finally turning toward spring. Everyone gathered at the tavern, drinking and laughing and telling stories that grew more outrageous with every round. Mara stayed late, Alara bundled against her chest, and watched Rowan laughing with the fishermen who'd become his friends. He looked happy. Really, genuinely happy. And when he caught her eye across the room and smiled, not the practiced smile of a duke, but something real and warm, Mara felt her heart do something dangerous. Not love. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But something close to forgiveness. At midnight, as the party was winding down, Rowan appeared at her side. Can I walk you home? It's a 3-minute walk. I know, but still. Mara hesitated, then nodded. They walked in comfortable silence, the stars bright overhead, the sound of the ocean a constant rhythm in the background. At the boarding house, Rowan stopped. Thank you for today, for all of this. You earned it. Did I? You're getting there. She shifted Alara slightly. It's going to take time, Rowan. A lot of time. I have time. Do you? What about Stormhaven? Your family? The estate? My cousin can have it. I wrote to him last week, told him I was renouncing the title. He'll be thrilled. He's wanted it for years. Rowan smiled slightly. The Ashcroft line will continue, just without me. And you're okay with that? More than okay. I'm free. He looked at her, and his expression was open. For the first time in my life, I get to choose who I want to be, and I'm choosing this. Graymore Ilara, you, if you'll have me as whatever we are now. We're co-parents, Mara said firmly. Friends, maybe, eventually, but that's all? That's more than I deserve. Yes, it is. He laughed, soft and genuine. You don't pull punches anymore. I never should have started. No, you shouldn't have. He stepped back, giving her space. Good night, Mara. Good night, Rowan. She watched him walk away back toward the tavern where he'd rented a permanent room and felt something settle in her chest. This wasn't a fairy tale. There was no happily ever after waiting for them, no magical reconciliation that would erase 3 years of pain. But maybe there was something else. Maybe there was the possibility of building something new, something honest, something that acknowledged the past without being imprisoned by it. Inside, Branna was waiting. You're smiling, she observed. Am I? Like you just won something. Mara looked down at Ilara, then back at Branna. Maybe I did. What did you win? My life, Mara said simply. I won my life back. And for the first time since she'd stood in that doorway in Stormhaven and watched her husband kiss another woman, Mara felt like she could breathe. Spring turned to summer, and Graymore came alive. The fishing season was in full swing, the boats going out every morning and returning heavy with cod and mackerel. The market overflowed with vegetables from the inland farms, and children ran barefoot through streets that had finally dried out after months of rain and mud. Ilara was 3 months old, fat and healthy, with her mother's dark eyes and a temper that made Branna laugh every time the baby screamed. She's got your spirit, Branna told Mara one afternoon while they hung laundry. That child knows what she wants and isn't afraid to demand it. She gets that from both of us, Mara said, wrestling a sheet onto the line while Ilara squirmed in the sling against her chest. Both of you? Rowan's stubborn when he decides he wants something. Branna raised an eyebrow. So we're admitting he has good qualities now. Mara flushed. I'm admitting he's persistent. That's not the same thing. But it was getting harder to pretend Rowan hadn't changed. He'd been in Graymore for 3 months now, working the dock 6 days a week and spending his Sundays helping repair roofs and mend fences for families who couldn't afford to pay someone. He'd given up everything. The title had been officially transferred to his cousin, the fortune divided among various Ashcroft holdings that Rowan wanted nothing to do with. He lived in 2 rooms above the tavern, owned 3 shirts and 2 pairs of trousers, and seemed happier than Mara had ever seen him. And he was good with Ilara. Mara had started letting him visit twice a week, supervised at first, then gradually allowing him time alone with their daughter. He was awkward, nervous, clearly terrified of doing something wrong, but he learned. He figured out how to hold her so she'd stop crying, how to change her without getting kicked in the face, how to make her laugh by making ridiculous faces. Watching him with Ilara did something to Mara's heart that she wasn't ready to examine too closely. He asked me yesterday if I'd let him take her to the beach, Mara said, pulling another sheet from the basket. And? I said yes, Branna grinned. Look at you, trusting people. Don't get used to it. But the truth was, Mara was learning to trust again. Not blindly, she'd never be that naive again, but carefully, deliberately, with her eyes open. And Rowan was earning it, one small choice at a time. The letter arrived in mid-June. It was addressed to Rowan, but the seal was unmistakable, the Ashcroft crest in deep red wax. Mara saw it when she went to the tavern to drop off some mended shirts she'd sewn for him. He was sitting at a table by the window, the letter open in front of him, his expression blank. What is it? She asked. He looked up, startled. Mara, I didn't hear you come in. What's the letter? It's from my cousin, Edmund. Rowan pushed it across the table. He's coming here. Mara's stomach dropped. Why? To see if I've lost my mind, apparently, and to try to convince me to come back. Are you going to? No. The answer was immediate, certain. But he won't believe that unless he sees it for himself. Mara picked up the letter and scanned it quickly. Edmund's handwriting was sharp and angry, full of words like disgrace and family obligation and temporary insanity. He was arriving in 4 days. He thinks this is a phase, she said. He thinks I've been bewitched by a peasant girl who seduced me away from my responsibilities. Rowan's mouth twisted. His words, not mine. Charming. Edmund's never been subtle. Rowan took the letter back, folded it carefully. I don't care what he thinks, but I need you to know, whatever he says, whatever threats he makes, I'm not leaving. He could make trouble for us. He could try, but he has no legal ground to stand on. I signed everything away. The title, the fortune, the authority. He met her eyes. I chose this life, Mara. I'm not giving it up. What if he tries to take Alara? Rowan's expression went hard. Then he'll learn very quickly that I may have given up my title, but I haven't forgotten how to fight. 4 days later, Edmund Ashcroft arrived in Greymore like a hurricane. He came with an entourage, 3 servants, 2 lawyers, and enough luggage to suggest he thought he'd be dragging Rowan back to civilization within the week. The village watched with barely concealed amusement as the carriages struggled through the unpaved streets, horses nervous and servants looking horrified at the state of the roads. Edmund himself was younger than Mara expected, maybe 25, with Rowan's dark hair and sharp features, but none of his recent warmth. He looked like every entitled nobleman Mara had ever encountered, and she disliked him immediately. He found Rowan at the docks, hauling nets with Nell and 2 other fishermen. "Rowan," Edmund's voice cut through the noise of the harbor. "What in God's name are you doing?" Rowan straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead, and turned to face his cousin. "Working. What does it look like?" "It looks like you've lost your mind." Edmund strode forward, his expensive boots already ruined by the mud. "You're the Duke of Ashcroft. I was the Duke of Ashcroft. Now I'm just Rowan." "That's not... You can't just..." Edmund sputtered, genuinely at a loss. "You have responsibilities, a legacy. You can't throw it all away for some fishing village." "I didn't throw it away. I chose something different." "This isn't a choice, it's a breakdown." Rowan set down the net carefully and walked closer. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "Edmund, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not coming back. This is my home now." "This?" Edmund gestured wildly at the harbor, the boats, the fishermen who were now openly staring. "This is not a home for an Ashcroft. Maybe not for you, but it is for me. The family is humiliated. Do you understand that? The scandal is enormous. People are saying you abandon your duties for a mistress." "She's not my mistress," Rowan interrupted. "She's the mother of my child and my former wife, and you'll speak of her with respect." Edmund's eyes narrowed. "So it's true. You have a bastard." "I have a daughter. Her name is Alara, and she's not a bastard. Her parents were married when she was conceived. But not when she was born." "Irrelevant." Edmund looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Rowan's expression made him pause. "I want to meet her." "No? She's an Ashcroft?" "She's a Hale, and you're not meeting her until you can be civil." "I'm always civil." "You just called her a bastard." Edmund had the grace to look slightly ashamed. "Fine. I apologize. But Rowan, you have to see reason. This life, it's beneath you. You were raised for something greater." "I was raised to be miserable," Rowan said quietly, "and I'm not doing that anymore." The conviction in his voice made Edmund step back. Mara, watching from the doorway of the fishmonger's shop with Alara in her arms, felt something fierce and proud rise in her chest. That night, Edmund demanded a meeting. He'd taken rooms at the tavern, the best ones available, which still meant a lumpy mattress and a window that didn't quite close, and summoned Rowan like he was still the Duke and Rowan was still his subordinate. Rowan went, but he brought Mara with him. Edmund's face when they entered together was almost comical. "You brought her?" "Her name is Mara, and yes, I brought her. Anything you say to me, you can say in front of her." Edmund's jaw tightened, but he gestured for them to sit. The room was cramped and stuffy, filled with trunks and papers that Edmund had apparently brought to make his case. He paced while he talked, his movements sharp and agitated. "I've spoken to the family lawyers," he began. "There's a precedent for this. Temporary abdication due to mental duress. We can reverse the title transfer, restore your position. I don't want it restored. You say that now. But in a year, 5 years? When you're still living in poverty and watching your daughter grow up without opportunities?" "She'll have opportunities," Mara cut in, "just not the kind you value." Edmund turned to her, his expression icy. "You've certainly done well for yourself. A duchess who ran away and somehow convinced a duke to follow her into obscurity. Quite the accomplishment." "Edmund," Rowan's voice was dangerous, "watch yourself. I'm simply stating facts. You're being cruel, and if you can't manage basic decency, this conversation is over." Edmund stopped pacing, his hands clenched into fists. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" The family is a laughingstock. Your father would be ashamed. My father was a tyrant who made everyone around him miserable. I don't give a damn what he would have thought. You're destroying everything he built. I'm saving myself from becoming him. Rowan's voice rose, and Alara stirred in Mara's arms. He immediately lowered his volume, but the intensity remained. I was turning into him, Edmund. Cold, cruel, incapable of seeing people as anything but tools. And I would have died that way if Mara hadn't been brave enough to leave. Edmund stared at him. You're serious. You actually believe that. I know it, and I'm not going back. Then what do you want from me? I want you to accept my decision. Take the title. Use the fortune. Live the life I was supposed to live, if that's what you want. Rowan's voice softened. But let me have this. This? Peace, family, a life where I'm more than a name. Edmund was silent for a long moment, his expression cycling through anger, confusion, and something that might have been envy. You were always the golden son, he said finally. Do you know how many years I spent wishing I could be you? I spent those same years wishing I could be anyone else. And now you get to be, while I'm stuck cleaning up your mess. I'm sorry for that. I am. But I'm not sorry for choosing this. Edmund looked at Mara, then at Alara, then back at Rowan. Show me, he said abruptly. Show you what? This life you've chosen. Show me why it's worth more than everything you gave up. Rowan glanced at Mara, who nodded slightly. All right, Rowan said. Tomorrow. Meet me at the docks at dawn. Edmund arrived at dawn looking like he hadn't slept, his fine clothes already rumpled, his expression wary. Rowan was waiting with Nell and the fishing crew, and he handed Edmund a pair of work gloves. What are these for? We're going fishing. You wanted to see the life? This is it. Edmund looked horrified. I don't know how to fish. Then you'll learn. Rowan grinned. Come on, boat leaves in 5 minutes. They spent the entire day on the water. Edmund was terrible at it, seasick, clumsy, completely out of his element. But the crew was patient, and Rowan was encouraging, and by the afternoon, Edmund had managed to haul in a net without falling overboard. When they returned to harbor, Edmund was sunburned and exhausted and smelled like fish. But he was smiling. He started, then laughed. That was awful. Yeah, Rowan agreed. It is, but it's also honest. You work, you eat, you help others, they help you. There's no pretense, no performance, just life. Edmund was quiet for a moment, watching the fishermen unload the catch, laughing and shouting to each other. You really are happy here, he said, and it wasn't a question. I am. Then I won't fight you. Edmund held out his hand. Take care of yourself, cousin, and your family. Rowan shook his hand, his grip firm. Thank you. But if you ever change your mind, I won't. But if you do, the door is open. I appreciate that, but I'm home, Edmund. For the first time in my life, I'm actually home. Edmund left the next morning with his entourage, his lawyers, and a story he'd probably never tell anyone because no one would believe it. And Rowan stood on the pier with Mara and Alara and watched the carriages disappear into the distance. That went better than expected, Mara said. He's not a bad person, just trapped in the same prison I was. Do you think he'll manage? He'll be fine. He always wanted the title more than I did. Rowan looked down at Alara, who was chewing on her fist and staring up at him with solemn eyes. Can I hold her? Mara handed her over without hesitation, and Rowan cradled his daughter against his chest with the easy confidence of someone who'd been practicing. Hello, little one, he murmured. Did you miss me? Alara grabbed his nose and squealed. Mara laughed, and Rowan looked at her with an expression so full of joy it made her chest ache. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For this. For her. For giving me a second chance when I didn't deserve it. You've earned it, Rowan. Every day you've earned it. He shifted Alara so he could reach out with one hand, and Mara took it without thinking. They stood there on the pier holding hands like tentative partners in something new and fragile, while their daughter babbled between them and the ocean rolled eternal in the background. It wasn't perfect. There were still hard days, nights when Mara couldn't sleep because the memories of Stormhaven came back too vivid and sharp, moments when Rowan's old instincts surfaced and he had to consciously choose to be different. But they were building something, slowly, carefully, with intention and honesty, and the understanding that trust was earned in inches, not miles. Summer turned to autumn, and the village prepared for the harvest season. Rowan had been in Graymore for 6 months, and the transformation was complete. He was no longer the outsider, the Duke, playing at poverty. He was one of them. Rowan the fisherman. Rowan who'd saved Finn from drowning. Rowan who could be counted on to help repair a fence or fix a roof or listen when someone needed to talk. And he was a father. Elara was 8 months old, crawling everywhere, getting into everything, laughing at things that weren't funny and crying at things that didn't matter. She had Rowan's stubborn streak and Mara's intensity, and she was the most beloved child in Graymore. Watching Rowan with her never got old. He'd come by the boarding house every evening after work, still smelling like fish, and Elara would shriek with delight and crawl toward him as fast as her chubby legs would carry her. He'd scoop her up, toss her in the air, despite Mara's protests that he'd make her sick, and carry her around while telling her about his day in a voice so gentle it made Mara's heart hurt. "You're going to spoil her," Mara told him one evening while they sat on the porch and watched Elara play with a wooden horse Rowan had carved. "That's what fathers do." "Not all fathers." "Then I'm going to be different." He looked at her. "I want to be the kind of father who shows up, who listens, who makes her feel like she matters more than anything else in the world." "You already are." "Am I?" "Yes, Rowan, you are." He smiled, and it was the real one, the one that crinkled the corners of his eyes and made him look younger. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life." "Good different or bad different?" "The best different." He hesitated. "Mara, I want to ask you something." Her heart jumped. "What?" "I want to build a house, here in Graymore. Nothing fancy, just something solid. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a workshop maybe?" He was speaking quickly, like he was afraid she'd say no before he finished. I hoped, maybe you and Elara would live there too. Not as my wife," he added hastily. "Not like that. Just as family. Co-parents sharing a space. Separate rooms, separate lives, but under the same roof, so Elara grows up with both of us." Mara stared at him. "You want us to live together?" "I want Elara to have stability, and I want—" He stopped, took a breath. "I want to be part of her everyday life. Not just visits, not just the easy moments. I want the hard parts too. The middle of the night crying, the teething, the first steps, all of it." "Rowan, I know it's a lot to ask. I know you probably need time to think about it. But I had to ask. Because I love her, Mara. More than I knew I could love anything, and I want to be the father she deserves." Mara looked down at Elara, who'd abandoned the horse in favor of trying to eat a leaf. A house, a home, not Stormhaven, with its cold halls and colder memories. Something new, built from scratch, with intention and care. A place where Elara could grow up knowing both her parents loved her. "Separate rooms," she said finally. Rowan's eyes widened. "Yes. Absolutely. And I get final say on decisions about Elara. Of course. And if this doesn't work, if it becomes toxic or painful, we revisit the arrangement." "Agreed." Mara took a breath. "Then yes, let's build a house." Rowan looked like she'd just handed him the world. "You mean it?" "I mean it. But Rowan—" She met his eyes. "This doesn't change what I said before. We're not getting back together. This is about Elara. I know. And that's enough." "Is it? Really?" He considered the question seriously. "It is. Because I'd rather have you as a friend and a partner in raising our daughter than lose you entirely by pushing for something you can't give." "What if I never love you again?" "Then I'll live with that. You don't owe me love, Mara. You don't owe me anything. But if you'll let me be part of Elara's life, really part of it, that's more than I ever hoped for." Mara felt tears prick her eyes. "You really have changed." "I'm trying, every day. I'm trying." "I know." She wiped her eyes roughly. "When do we start building?" They broke ground in October. The whole village turned out to help. The fishermen laid the foundation. The women organized meals. Children ran underfoot, getting in the way and being useful in equal measure. And Rowan worked harder than anyone, laying stone and hauling timber and hammering until his hands bled through the calluses. The house rose slowly, a sturdy structure of wood and stone, with windows that faced the ocean and a porch big enough for a rocking chair. It wasn't grand, it wasn't impressive, but it was theirs. They moved in just before winter, when the first snow was starting to fall. The house smelled like fresh wood and smoke from the fireplace Rowan had built himself. Their furniture was mismatched, donated, traded, scavenged from various corners of the village. The rooms were small, the floors uneven in places, and the roof leaked slightly in one corner. Mara loved it fiercely. On their first night, she put Alara to bed in the nursery, painted pale yellow with a crib Nell had carved and curtains Iris had sewn, and stood in the doorway watching her daughter sleep. Rowan appeared beside her, silent and careful. "She looks happy," he whispered. "She is." "Are you?" Mara considered the question. Was she happy? After everything, after running, after fighting, after risking everything to build this strange new life? "Yes," she said, and meant it. "I think I am." Rowan smiled, and for a moment they stood there together, two people who'd destroyed each other and somehow found a way to build something better from the wreckage. "Good night, Mara." "Good night, Rowan." He went to his room, the smaller one, at the back of the house, and Mara went to hers. And for the first time in years, she slept without nightmares. 2 years later, everything changed again. Alara was 2.5, talking in complete sentences and getting into trouble with a creativity that terrified and delighted both her parents. Mara and Rowan had settled into a rhythm, not quite a family in the traditional sense, but something close. They co-parented seamlessly. They ate meals together. They made decisions jointly, and slowly, carefully, they'd become friends. Real friends. The kind who could laugh together over Alara's latest escapade, who could sit in comfortable silence while she played, who could disagree about discipline or bedtime without it becoming a war. Mara still didn't love him. She'd made peace with that. Love felt like too much, too risky, too close to the girl she'd been who'd trusted blindly and been destroyed for it. But she trusted him. And maybe in the end, that mattered more. Then, on a crisp March morning, a carriage arrived in Greymore. Not Edmund's, someone else's. Mara was at the market when she saw it. A fine carriage with a crest she didn't recognize, pulled by horses too expensive for this village. Her stomach dropped. She grabbed Alara, who'd been examining a basket of apples, and headed for home. But the carriage was already there, parked in front of their house, and a woman was stepping out. She was elegant, maybe 50, with gray-streaked hair and a face that looked kind but tired. Rowan was standing in the doorway, frozen. "Mother," he said, and his voice cracked. The woman, the Dowager Duchess of Ashcroft, Mara realized with a jolt, looked at her son with an expression that was equal parts relief and sorrow. "Rowan," she said, "I needed to see for myself." "See what?" "If you were all right, if you were happy." She looked past him, and her eyes landed on Mara and Alara. "And to meet my granddaughter." Mara's arms tightened around Alara instinctively. Rowan stepped forward. "Mother, this is Mara, and this is Alara." The Dowager Duchess approached slowly, like she was afraid of spooking them. When she reached Mara, she didn't try to touch Alara, just looked at her with an expression of wonder. "She's beautiful," she whispered. "She looks like you, Rowan, around the eyes." "She looks like her mother," Rowan said firmly. The Dowager smiled sadly. "She looks like both of you," she turned to Mara. "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For not stopping him. For not seeing what he was doing to you. For caring more about appearance and propriety than your happiness." Her voice was steady but full of regret. "I knew he was cruel. I knew he was making you miserable. And I did nothing." Mara didn't know what to say. "I don't expect forgiveness," the Dowager continued. "I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and that I'm proud of you, for leaving, for surviving, for building this." She gestured at the house, the village, the life they'd made. "Thank you," Mara managed. The Dowager turned back to Rowan. "Edmund told me you'd changed, but I didn't believe him. I thought—" She stopped, her composure cracking. "I thought I'd lost you, that you'd become so broken you'd never recover." "You didn't lose me, Mother. I lost myself. Mara helped me find my way back." "Then I owe her more than an apology." The Dowager looked at Alara again. "May I hold her? Just for a moment?" Mara looked at Rowan, who nodded. Slowly, carefully, she transferred Alara to the Dowager's arms. Alara, who was usually shy with strangers, looked up at her grandmother and smiled. The Dowager's face crumpled, and she cried quietly while holding her granddaughter, tears tracking down her face and landing on Alara's dress. "I'm staying in the village for a week," she said when she'd composed herself. "I'd like to spend time with you, all of you, if you'll allow it." "Of course," Rowan said immediately. Mara nodded, still processing. The Dowager stayed for 8 days. She met the villagers, ate fish stew in the boarding house, sat on the beach and watched Alara play in the sand. She asked questions, not invasive ones, just genuine curiosity about their life. And on her last day, she pulled Mara aside. "I want you to have something," she said, handing her a small wooden box. Inside was a necklace. Simple, beautiful, clearly expensive, but not ostentatious. "It was mine," the dowager said, "from before I married into the Ashcroft family. I want Alara to have it when she's older, as a reminder that she comes from strength, not just wealth." Mara's throat tightened. "Thank you." "And Mara," the dowager hesitated, "I know you don't love my son anymore. I understand why, but I want you to know he's become the man I always hoped he'd be, and that's because of you." "It's because of him," Mara corrected gently. "He chose to change. I just gave him a reason." "Then you gave him the greatest gift possible." The dowager smiled. "Take care of each other, and that beautiful child." She left the next morning, and Graymore felt quieter without her. 3 years passed. Alara started school in the village, learning to read and write alongside the other children. She was bright, curious, and completely fearless, a combination that gave both her parents gray hairs. Mara opened a small shop selling mended clothes and simple tailoring. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and it gave her purpose beyond motherhood. Rowan became the harbor master, managing the docks and mediating disputes between fishermen. He was good at it, fair, patient, respected. They built a life, not the one either of them had imagined, not perfect or easy or without conflict, but honest, real, theirs. And then, one evening in late summer, everything shifted again. They were sitting on the porch, watching Alara chase fireflies in the yard, when Rowan said, "I need to tell you something." Mara's heart jumped. "What?" "I'm in love with you." She froze. "I know you don't feel the same way," he continued quickly. "I know you might never feel that way, and I'm not asking for anything. I needed you to know. Because it's true, and I'm tired of pretending it isn't." Mara stared at him, her mind blank. "You don't have to say anything," Rowan said. "I don't want to make things awkward. I love you, Mara. Not because you're the mother of my child, not because we share a house, but because you're brave and strong, and you rebuilt yourself when I tried to destroy you. Because you're a better person than I could ever hope to be. Because when I look at you, I see everything I want to become." "Rowan, I'm not asking you to love me back. I just wanted you to know." Mara looked at him. This man who'd been her jailer and was now her partner, who'd hurt her deeply and worked every day since to heal that damage, who loved their daughter with a ferocity that still surprised her. And she realized something that made her chest ache. She didn't love him the way she'd loved the idea of him when they married. That love had been naive, built on hope and ignorance. But this slow-built trust, this partnership, this daily choice to build something together, maybe this was something better. "I don't know if I can love you the way you want me to," she said slowly. "That girl who believed in fairy tales is gone. You helped kill her. I know, I'm sorry. But," she continued, "I think I might be able to love you the way I am now, carefully, skeptically, with my eyes open and my walls up." Rowan's eyes widened. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm willing to try. Not marriage. I'm not ready for that. Maybe never will be. But something more than what we have now. If you're patient, if you understand it might take years, if you accept that I might never fully trust you the way I should." "I'll take it," he said immediately. "Whatever you can give, I'll take it. Even if it's messy and complicated and sometimes painful?" "Especially then." Mara looked at Alara, still chasing fireflies, completely oblivious to the fact that her parents were rewriting their entire relationship on the porch. "Then let's try," she said, "one day at a time." Rowan reached out, slow and careful, and took her hand, and Mara let him. 5 years after that, they stood before the entire village and said vows. Not in a church. Neither of them wanted that. On the beach, at sunset, with Alara as their witness and the ocean as their backdrop. The vows were simple, honest. Nothing about obeying or possessing or till death. Just promises to choose each other every day, even when it was hard. To be partners. To raise their daughter together. To build a life based on truth instead of duty. When the unofficial ceremony was over, led by Branna, because of course it was, the village celebrated with fish and bread and dancing that lasted until dawn, and Mara Hale, formerly Elena Weiermont, formerly Duchess of Ashcroft, danced with her husband under the stars and thought about how far she'd come. From invisible wife to runaway to mother to business owner to partner. From powerless to powerful in ways she'd never imagined. She'd survived by running, but she'd thrived by standing still. By choosing a life instead of accepting one. By demanding respect instead of waiting for it. By building something new from the ruins of something broken. "What are you thinking?" Rowan asked, pulling her closer. "That I won," Mara said. "Won what?" "Everything. My life, my daughter, my freedom." She looked up at him. "And maybe, eventually, even you." He laughed, and it was the real one. "I'm the luckiest man alive." "You're the luckiest man who almost lost everything and barely managed to save himself." "True." He kissed her forehead. "Thank you for giving me the chance. Thank you for earning it." They danced until Alara, 8 years old and exhausted, tugged on Mara's skirt. "Can we go home now?" "Yes, sweetheart. Let's go home." And the three of them walked back to their house. Small, imperfect, theirs. While behind them the village celebrated and the ocean rolled eternal and the stars watched like witnesses to something rare and hard-won. A woman who'd been bought and sold and had refused to stay that way. A man who'd inherited power and had chosen to surrender it. And a daughter who would grow up knowing that strength wasn't about titles or wealth. It was about choosing yourself, even when the cost was everything. It was about building something real from the ashes of something false. It was about survival becoming transformation, and transformation becoming legacy. And that, Mara thought, as she tucked Alara into bed that night, was a story worth telling. Not because it was perfect, but because it was true.